Every day on this channel, I cover everything Elon said on X in the last 24 hours. And here's how many times Elon posted about each subject today. I will cover everything he said about each topic before moving on to the next one. And starting with Tesla, yesterday we saw Elon declare that product always wins over brand. Nick quoted that today saying Elon ended postmodernism. Elon said reality always wins. And Mario says Tesla quietly filed a patent that could cut battery production costs by nearly half. The breakthrough is a new way to make battery cathodes without toxic liquid solvents, using a microscopic spiderweb structure that binds the materials together instead. It also triples manufacturing speed and could shrink the physical footprint of battery factories by up to 50%. It's not a lab experiment either. Gigafactory Texas is already mass producing these cells for select Model Y vehicles, with Cybertruck, Cybercab, and Semi rollout expected through 2026 and 2027. Battery cost is the last big barrier to affordable EVs. Tesla just moved the needle. Elon said it will not cut battery costs in half, but it will significantly reduce the cost of battery cathode production. And then Mario made another post about Starlink. Elon replied saying the Reuters article is false. They made improper use of the Starlink civilian system for military purposes, direct violation of terms of service. He replied to another post that was deleted by Mario saying, almost everything you are saying is false and simply copying fake news from other accounts. There is a US government arm of SpaceX called Starshield, which has a different set of satellites than Starlink, which is for civilian use. The company that makes the suicide drones incorrectly used the civilian system instead of the Starshield. And Elon ended up unfollowing Mario this morning on X. It sounds like this was the story being reported. Polymarket Money said Elon Musk says the Pentagon used SpaceX's civilian Starlink system for military purposes in direct violation of its terms of service. Elon replied saying not the Pentagon, the company did it. And readers added that context. Elon clarified that unauthorized use of civilian Starlink for military purposes was by a company, not the Pentagon. He also made that clarification to somebody else who deleted the post. David said tensions are rising between the Pentagon and SpaceX over multiple issues, including an episode where Elon's company hiked the price of Starlink, used to guide strike drones at the start of the Iran war. Sean said the fake news media has the story wrong again. SpaceX remains a strong and valued partner to the Department of War. The claims in this article are simply not based in reality and do not reflect the close, effective collaboration between our teams. Elon said correction issued by Department of War. And NASA just launched a new website for its moon-based missions, which aims to build a permanent $20 billion US base on the moon. SpaceX's Starship rocket will play a big role in these missions. Phase 1 is now to 2029. Secure reliable access to lunar surface and experiment. Phase 2 begins in 2029. They want to establish the initial moon base operating capability. In 2032 and beyond is Phase 3, where they achieve semi-permanent crew presence. Elon reposted that, and he said it's time to build major base on the moon. And he also called NASA's aspirations inspiring. And the U.S. Space Force awards SpaceX $2.29 billion contract for military space data network. Elon said once again it's important to emphasize that there are two different systems, Starlink for civilian usage and Starshield that is built and operated for the U.S. government. We try hard to keep these separate. And Starlink is coming to American Airlines. Michael Nichols said thanks American Airlines for choosing Starlink, and Elon reposted it. And that is now 38 airlines that have partnered with Starlink. Elon reposted that as well. And former SpaceX astronaut Garrett Reisman reveals the single prism Elon runs every major decision through.
Now, what is the timeline in terms of, like, does SpaceX have a multiple stage timeline, like a timeline for incorporating the Dragon crew, and then a timeline for the Starhopper, and then a timeline for additional projects in the future? Like, is he thinking along these lines of charted out progress?
Oh yeah. He's in fact he measures pretty much every major decision by whether or not it brings the day when we have a self-sustainable colony on Mars sooner or later. That's the prism by which he makes every single decision he makes it through that prism.
Jesus.
Yeah. So he's got an idea, and he'll keep pushing, and he gives us aggressive timelines that we have to work to, and we work really hard to try to meet them. It's hard when you're doing stuff that's this complicated to predict exactly how long it's going to take. So we end up often falling a little bit behind, but we do our best.
That's the case though with everything that's that crazy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, especially Elon, he's never right in his predictions. All his wacky inventions, they're they're always a little off.
Yeah.
You know? But what do you think?
But he's so driven, and he's such a smart guy, and he's the most he's really the most driven person I think I've ever met.
Elon quoted that saying, mostly true. What matters is securing the long-term future of consciousness, both on Earth and other heavenly bodies. We cannot just focus on Earth because there are irreducible external and internal cataclysmic risks. The moon is faster to make self-growing, but is more susceptible to problems on Earth. Mars will take longer to make self-growing because it is so hard to reach, but it is more secure from Earth disasters for that same reason. Both the moon and Mars should have self-growing civilizations. Making this happen is the prime directive of SpaceX. And here's an old clip on why humanity must become multiplanetary. Elon reposted it. John Edwards quoted Elon saying, "This is our mission. The timeline for achieving this shrinks significantly if we can 10 to 100x the useful output of our engineering and manufacturing teams. AI and robotics make this possible, and this can happen in our lifetime." Elon reposted that. Beth Bezos said, "Elon better land a Cybertruck on the moon soon. It would be an insanely aesthetic move." Elon replied, 100. And after Elon said it's time to build a base on the moon, Tim Burchett asked, "Isn't it cheaper to keep staging it in a Hollywood studio?" Elon said, "People will just think it's AI." And Eric said, "This is going to be a problem." The headline reads, "Analyst on China's spent rocket stages." Quote, "Things only continue to get worse. As in China, the total rocket body mass in long-lived low Earth orbit is on the rise." Elon said, "Maybe we should make a Hungry Hippo version of Starship one day to collect and deorbit spent rocket stages and other space junk." And Vincent said, "SpaceX just disclosed Starlink V3 capacity in its S1. The market is reading the wrong number. The headline is a more than 10x jump per satellite, but the real number to internalize isn't 10x. Constellation throughput compounds two curves. Satellite count x per satellite capacity. 10x fleet times 10x capacity equals 100x total constellation throughput. This is what re-rates the Starlink total addressable market, not the per satellite headline. This is the communications layer reaching dominance. Terrestrial fiber and cellular towers are capex prohibitive across emerging markets. Light in fiber travels 31% slower than in vacuum, so orbital mesh already beats subsea cable on transcontinental latency. At 100 petabits per second constellation capacity, the marginal cost curve for global bandwidth collapses. Post-XAI merger, the compute layer gets its physical substrate. 100,000 V3, 4, and 5 satellites isn't just broadband. It's the orbital backbone for AI compute distribution, Grok inference, training data pipelines, edge compute, all vertically integrated inside one entity. Communications and compute in the same orbital fabric. No competitor is close." Elon said, "Yeah." And Hermes said supersonic Mach 1.21. Their quarter-horse product is now the world's first privately developed unmanned supersonic jet and the fastest unmanned aircraft flying today. This flight makes Hermes the fastest company in aviation history to go from founding to supersonic flight, exactly 364 days after the maiden flight of our first aircraft. Now we fly faster. The White House quoted that saying, "America is at the threshold of a bold new chapter in aerospace innovation." Nearly 1 year ago, POTUS signed an executive order to update the outdated and overly restrictive regulations that grounded supersonic flight over land for more than 50 years. Today, faster, quieter, safer, and more efficient air travel is on the horizon. Elon said, "Cool." And moving on to XAI, Peter Diamandis said Elon doesn't need to run the best AI model. He needs to control the best hardware. NVIDIA is the most valuable company on Earth, and their models aren't the most popular. The hyperscaler play works. Elon said, "What you say is true, but nonetheless, our AI will be great. Whether it is the best remains to be seen, but I will never give up. Never." SpaceX AI is only 3 years old. That's half the age of Anthropic and quarter the age of OpenAI. Let's see where things stand 3 years from now. And Elon replied to himself saying SpaceX had achieved nothing of note after 3 years and was written off as dead after 6 years with 3 consecutive launch failures. But you may have noticed that things are different now. Someone quoted that saying, "Yep, Elon has gained some appreciation for the hardness of this task. Amazing. Now he admits he might not get to number 1 in 3 more years. This makes me more bullish on Grok." Elon replied, "What the fuck are you talking about, kid? I co-founded OpenAI 10 years ago. I understand the difficulty." And some more bug fixes shipping to Grok build today. Elon reposted it. XAI said, "Thank you so much for all the feedback on the Grok build beta. Some of you reported hitting limits quickly. Our team found areas to improve caching. So we've reset Grok build usage limits for all accounts. Please keep sharing feedback." And you can paste screenshots into Grok build. And Dan said the XAI team does not stop cooking as they're shipping bug fixes every day. Elon said, "I just left the SpaceX AI office at 2:45 a.m. and people were still going. I think we might be close to a significant breakthrough in training." Tom said, "Elon, please don't forget about Grok Imagine Bro grows. Our rate limits have been cut by 80 to 90% in the last month. Can you help us, please? Elon said we'll raise limits. And here is a Grok Imagined creation that Elon reposted. And John Carmack says, I have been very impressed by semi-analysis. I think of myself as a wide-ranging systems engineer, looking for value at every level from the chip specs to the user interface. But semi-analysis exposes me to additional levels of the system, both above data centers and below semiconductor fabrication. It probably puts me in just knows enough to be dangerous territory. Neat things I learned today. Some of the 800-volt direct current data center design choices leverage parts commoditized by electric vehicles. And there is now a silicon carbide metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor that can operate on 10 kilovolts electricity, opening up the possibility of working directly with medium voltage AC power transmission lines without stepping down. Elon said, yeah. And Uber's COO has said that it's getting harder to justify its AI costs because there's no way to show a link between AI spend and any meaningful increase in useful features. This is the first time I've seen a company say this directly. Elon said, interesting. And Breveo said in Marc Andreessen's Techno-Optimist Manifesto, there's a sentence that struck me. Quote, our enemies are not bad people, but rather bad ideas. Take Jankovici. The man is brilliant, sincere, hardworking. He doesn't wake up in the morning thinking he's going to harm humanity, but the idea he carries, degrowth, rationing, frugality elevated to a civilizational horizon, is a profoundly destructive one. It takes brilliant minds and turns them into political commissars of a pauperized future. And the most fascinating part is what this idea does to the people who adopt it. In my circle, a large part of my friends are on this degrowth line with the whole package that comes with it. Money is evil, but they want it. We should fly less, but they dream of traveling everywhere. We should consume less, but they won't give up anything they truly love. And they all have one thing in common, they are depressed. One of them even confided in me that he's on antidepressants. It's no coincidence, it's mechanical. When you believe that your desire to live, to create, to rise is morally suspect, you destroy yourself from the inside. You spend your life apologizing for existing. You live in permanent dissonance between what your body wants and what your ideology orders. Hence my theory. When you believe something fundamentally false, degrowth, communism, religious extremism, it's only a matter of time before it becomes truly destructive. First for yourself, then for others. Bad ideas kill. Slowly in those who believe them, brutally in those who suffer them. That's why the battle of ideas isn't an intellectual luxury, it's the most important battle of our time. Elon said, wise words. And Sam Altman and OpenAI are caught in a self-dealing scandal. Over 60 civic groups just demanded California's Attorney General investigate their shady Cerberus deal. Sam Altman and Greg Brockman are large personal investors in Cerberus. OpenAI signed a multi-billion-dollar deal to buy massive computing from them, and that spending exploded Cerberus's valuation from $8 billion to $23 billion to $30 billion IPO, and Greg Brockman hid his personal stake from Elon Musk under oath. This is exactly the self-dealing California law prohibits. OpenAI was funded as a nonprofit to benefit humanity, and its leaders now look like they are directing company billions to pump their own investments. The mission was always a lie. Elon raised an eyebrow at that one. And Elon's boring company wants to solve the problem of traffic. Elon reposted it. And Mises showed that socialist central planning isn't merely inefficient, it's impossible. Without private property and genuine market prices, planners lack any rational way to allocate scarce resources to determine real costs and needs. Elon quoted that saying, prices are critical information. Without an economy cannot function. And Mark Ruffalo talks about how America should shift from capitalism. Quote, it's going to take some reimagining of what America is. Elon said, dumbass doesn't realize this applies to rich actors like himself. And it begins. New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani unveils plan to transfer ownership from landlords to the community.
When necessary, we will take aggressive legal action to remove negligent owners and property managers. And for buildings that have suffered chronic neglect, we will work to transfer ownership to responsible stewards. Stewards that include community land trusts, nonprofits, or even the tenants themselves.
Elon reposted that, and he reposted it from another account as well. Paul Graham said, something I told 14-year-old. There's a kind of politician who tells people, your life is bad because someone stole what's rightfully yours. Vote for me and I'll get it back for you. They do it on both the left, Vladimir Lenin, and right, Adolf Hitler, and they are invariably bad news. Elon said Hitler was also left, just a different type of left. hardcore socialist. And Dries van Langenhove said a very sad announcement. I've just been convicted a second time for hate speech, and it is only due to a technicality that I could not immediately be sent to jail. To the judge's frustration. In an ironic turn of events, it's actually thanks to my previous prison sentence that I am now still free, in a physical sense at least. Call me naive, but I didn't think they would take it this far, given that this precedent criminalizes many of the arguments used by even the most moderate politicians critical of mass migration. In February 2024, I gave a lecture at Catholic University Leuven, wherein I linked mass migration to crime and a deterioration of our quality of life. Every single point I made was 100% the truth and based on scientific evidence. Cynically, even the judge that convicted me admits as much by writing in his verdict. Even if all the statements made by Van Langenhove are based on scientific evidence and statistics, it makes no difference to the criminal intent. Van Langenhove is not charged with spreading false information. He is charged with presenting facts in a way that incites hatred against persons on the grounds of one or more of the protected criteria in the anti-racism law. That's a lot of words just to say he wants to send me to prison for speaking the truth. Even the regime media right. It did not matter to the court that Van Langenhove was quoting scientific sources. The judge argued that Van Langenhove's main message was that a big part of the societal problems like insecurity, housing shortages, and lowering educational standards are due to mass migration. You may think the regime media are being sympathetic to me in the first sentence, but in reality they are warning people. Even if you speak the truth, if you go against our narrative, we will crush you in every way possible. Both the public prosecutor and the judge did not present a single real argument as to how or against whom I would have incited hatred. So even if I would accept their crazy dystopic law, I still did not break it. The only argument that they present is that I created a hostile atmosphere of us versus them in regards to migrants. But even this silly argument is not true. To me, the deadly disease is self-hatred, and one of its worst symptoms is replacement migration. My enemy is thus not the migrants themselves, but those orchestrating the mass migration. Sadly, in Belgium, evidence is not needed and vibes are enough to put someone in jail. Given the fact that I have another court case coming up in September and that I have a dozen active criminal investigations for hate speech, time is running out for me. I have already paid more than 420,000 euros in legal fees and there is no ending in sight. I have been in an intense battle of attrition for 8 years and must now regroup to make sure I can still win. If you want to help me, you can do so via the links below. If you can help in other ways, please contact me via DM. If you live in a country that still has free speech, never let them touch it. However noble they make the motive sound, because this is where it leads to. Elon said, wow. A Belgian man convicted of hate speech describes the judicial rationale for his latest conviction. I asked Gemini, is this man's account of his conviction accurate? Gemini replied that it was grossly inaccurate. So I copied and pasted Gemini's response and asked Grok to reply to it. Grok told me that Gemini was mixing up 2 different cases, and that the tweet was an accurate representation of the latest judicial proceeding against Van Langenhove. I went back to Gemini and asked it to reply to what Grok had just told me, and it responded, Grok is completely correct. I mixed up the cases, and I appreciate the correction. As I've tweeted in the past, this sort of thing happens all the time. Elon said, Grok. Eva said, Dries has just been convicted again, this time for speaking the truth about the disastrous consequence of mass migration. The most insane part is that the Belgian court even admitted Dries spoke the truth, as what he said was factual, but deems it a crime because it could incite hatred. Let that sink in. They are criminalizing the truth and they are using Dries to set an example. Let's come together to help him. Dries is a young father, a brave patriot, and the Belgian establishment has been trying to destroy him for years. He's taken so many hits. He really deserves our help. Elon said, wow. The Secretary of State said policymakers worried about the rise of the so-called far right should avoid criminalizing accurate, data-driven political speech about mass migration, as this ruling appears to explicitly contemplate. Doing so means that people willing to be convicted of racism get a monopoly on making arguments that strike large segments of the public as important and true. Elon reposted that. Kevin Bass said the truth is called hateful in Belgium, therefore speaking it is against the law. This is more frightening than calling the truth misinformation. They have stopped pretending completely. They are openly admitting that they have criminalized the truth. Elon said, thank heaven for the First Amendment in America. And Muslims now make up a major share of the younger generation in the Austrian capital. Among students in Vienna's public schools, 42% identify as Muslim. Elon said almost a majority. And this is not Somalia. It's not Nigeria or Sudan either. This is Belgium. This is the European Union. Elon replied, wow. It is no wonder African men are celebrating. The EU Migration Pact comes into force on the 12th of June 2026. Were you aware of the EU Migration Pact? The Soros-owned EU Commission will force EU member states to take in mandatory quota of hordes of aggressive, low-IQ men that you will pay to house, clothe, and feed for the rest of your life. Elon replied, "What the fuck?" Minnesota watched a Somali man walk free after a jury convicted him of stealing $7 million in taxpayer money. The jury called the evidence overwhelming. The judge overturned the verdict anyway. Will Tanner said, meanwhile, Officer Tao spent nearly half a decade in prison for simply being nearby as George Floyd overdosed on fentanyl. Elon reposted that. TJ said Floyd had norfentanyl in his blood because his first ingestion of fentanyl is not the one that contributed to his death. He lived long enough to metabolize that first ingestion, but then as officers Lane and Kung approached his vehicle, Floyd shoved speedballs in his mouth, to hide them probably. They began to dissolve as he walked to Squad 320. He began actively fighting. Just as the meth was kicking in a few minutes later, he spit the speedballs out of his mouth into the back of Squad 320, but not before a second dose of fentanyl made its way into his bloodstream. Almost exactly 5 minutes later, he was dead, corresponding precisely to the timing of anticipated peak respiratory depression. There's a lot more here, but all of it is consistent with the same conclusion. The second dose of fentanyl played a material role in Floyd's death, together with other factors. None of them had anything to do with Chauvin. Kevin said, now an innocent man is in prison. He followed protocol. The suspect died of an overdose. Happened to be black. Woke mob hated Trump. Middle of COVID. Stressed and wanted blood. The justice system facilitated the lynching, but it wasn't Floyd who was lynched. It was Chauvin. Elon said true. And a bunch of X-users debate this story for quite some time. Gary says, yet you think you know more than the medical examiner who did the autopsy. You're just another racist, MAGA piece of shit. TJ said, below is a common error. Here are the facts. Dr. Andrew Baker, the chief medical examiner for Hennepin County, did not agree with the prosecution's evolving theories of the cause of Floyd's death. He did not find that Floyd died from a vascular restraint, which was the prosecution's theory at the beginning of trial. And he did not agree that Floyd died of positional asphyxia, which became the prosecution's fallback theory when in the middle of trial, and to prosecutors' utter surprise, their blood choke theory imploded in real time. Baker's autopsy provided zero evidentiary support for everything the prosecutors wanted the jury to believe. But it's worse than that. Baker also found a lack of evidence where one would expect to find evidence had the prosecution's theories been correct. Baker called this absence of evidence the pertinent negatives, and they all worked against the prosecution. Elon reposted that. Helen said, polygamy is illegal in the UK, but if you've married 4 wives overseas and moved here, you could claim up to £78,000 in benefits paid for by British taxpayers. That is absurd, and conservatives will end this. Nick said conservatives had the best part of a generation in power to end this. Instead, we got the Boris wave. Elon said conservative, LMAO. And 11 rape convictions, not 1 day in custody, and Lammy wants to go further. Viewer discretion's advised. 2 girls were raped in a New Forest town in November 2024 and January 2025. They were 15 and 14 years old, and their attackers filmed the assaults, shared the footage online, and laughed. One of the girls was raped at knife point. 3 boys walked out of Southampton Crown Court with youth rehabilitation orders and a 3-month curfew. 11 rape convictions between them, and not 1 day in custody. Elon replied with some exclamation marks. And in Italy, an illegal migrant was filmed sexually assaulting a woman in broad daylight right on the street. The migrant pinned an Italian woman down while she screamed for help. Police are still trying to identify the assailant. Elon again replied with some exclamation marks. And Alice Smith said any civilized society would take child rapists and hang them until dead before the sun went down on another day. Elon said yes. David Sachs said Elon still works incredibly hard. This is an old clip we've seen before on this channel. Elon reposted it. And here's Elon's mother in a magnificent gown. Elon reposted it as well. And the aid industry raises money by showing the world images of African children with flies in their eyes and swollen bellies. That money is supposed to help us, but those images do something else too. They plant a belief. One of my employees, Yahara, told me she grew up thinking Africans were inferior because every magazine showed people like her looking pathetic while the world saved them. Aid didn't just fail to fix poverty, it taught an entire generation of Africans to feel small. Elon said exactly, the West should stop treating Africa like it desperately needs their help. This is patronizing nonsense. Frankly, my observation is that the average happiness in a village in Africa is higher than the average happiness in Beverly Hills. So that's everything that Elon said today. We learned about the 3 phases of the NASA moon base. Elon said maybe we should make a hungry hippo version of Starship one day to collect and deorbit spent rocket stages and other space junk. And he said SpaceX AI is only 3 years old, so let's see where things stand 3 years from now. We also saw Mum Mamdani of New York City wants to transfer building ownership from negligent landlords to non-profits and even the tenants. And if you guys want early access to these daily videos, you can gain access by joining this channel as a member, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.